I'm an actor of a certain age. I guess you could tell by looking at me. I started acting later in life. Well, that's not entirely true. Between the ages of 9 and 30, I spent a lot of time on stage. In fact, when I lived in New York City in the early 1970s, I almost went down to Lower Manhattan to study with Uta Hagen, one of the great actors of her era. Played the original Martha in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, won a Tony. But I'd already started on another profession, college teaching, and I had child support to pay, so I figured I'll continue on the road that I'm on, at least for another 2 years, and then I was fired from my first teaching job for being a bit too outspoken about the war in Cambodia and Vietnam. You know, that's what makes God laugh, people making plans. I spent the next 7 years trying to find myself and buying a not inconsequential number of yachts for psychotherapists. And I guess the day job didn't work out too badly because I founded a think tank in Washington and I spent 5 years in the Clinton White House. But that actor person never left. I mean, I was doing television interviews, radio interviews, briefings, speeches, speaking at meetings. It was all performance. And then when I'd finished that job, I went back to the university and I taught people about what I've been doing in the real world. But I'll tell you, academic administration, not my bag. I think it was Henry Kissinger who said the reason academic politics are so vicious is because the stakes are so small. So one day about 16 years ago, I had lunch with a friend of mine. And we talked about universities and we talked about theater. And as we were leaving, he said to me, I just want to point out I had lunch with two guys, one of whom was a really depressed college professor and the other of whom lit up like a Roman candle when he started talking about acting. I just observed that. Well, that was a wake-up call. It didn't take me a week to get my butt down to Studio Theater Conservatory and start studying the theater, a realism school, hardcore. And I still remember the first day of the first class, actor's process, that I took at Studio Theater Conservatory. We're doing warm-ups in actor's process, and I'm thinking, I'm deliriously happy. This is exactly where I want to be. All of Washington had just faded away into the background, and I was right there. Yeah, I was everybody's father. I was everybody's uncle. I was everybody's preacher. I was everybody's teacher, all as the oldest student in the class. I was also, at one point, an aging pedophile. But I was glad I did it. I learned a lot about making choices, about taking risks. I remember one risk. I was doing Frankie and Johnny and the Claire de Lune for a scene class. And we were doing a scene which was, well, let's just call it post-coital. And I don't know very many people who immediately upon finishing making love jump out of bed in their shorts. So with the agreement of my scene partner, I took my shorts off, climbed between the sheets, started the dialogue, climbed out of the bed, put my shorts back on, and we continued the scene. Realism. Well, the teacher thought it was realism too. He was a little bit concerned that the audience might lose sight of the dialogue at the sight of my privates, but it was sure realism. But I'm glad I tried it. I was making choices. I was taking risks. I was failing greatly. I was doing the private in public, which is what acting's all about. Well, when I started to audition, I found out there were a lot of parts for an older white male. Surprise, surprise. Sexism and racism alive and well in the theater world like everywhere else in the country. But I got to tell you, I loved every part I played and every show I was in at every level of acting. It was wonderful. So when I retired and moved to Maine, I wondered if there was going to be any work in Maine. I mean, there are 70 theaters in the greater Washington area. I don't know if there are 70 theaters in the entire state of Maine. So in Bath one night, I walked into a production of Twelfth Night. was on the library lawn and it started to drizzle, and that show just migrated from the library lawn into the gazebo seamlessly. It was a wonderful show. I said to myself, I want to meet that director. So I searched him out. Like most main directors, he was folding up the card table for the ticket booth, and I told him I wanted to audition for him. And I did. And I've worked for him for 6 years. Another director cast me as King Lear, the summit role for an older actor. I mean, who can beat running through the audience in a loincloth, hollering, "Sa, sa, sa!" Wonderful experience. I was starting to learn the main theatrical world, and I was beginning to get the roadmap, and I thought I'd brush up my Shakespeare. So 2 years ago, I went down to Lenox, Massachusetts, to Shakespeare & Co., where I took classes for a month. And that's where it hit me. Age. It turns out that the 20 or 30 forward rolls we were doing every morning in movement class were pretty hard on my lumbar region. And I've been struggling with sciatica ever since. So I've discovered that technology is the actor's friend. I have new lenses to replace the yellowing ones so I can see the audience and the stage. I have hearing aids so I can hear the cues. I have walking sticks for long walks. I wear glasses, 3 different pair, for seeing, for reading, for driving at night. And I understand now why all senior citizens start almost every conversation with, "How's your health?" And then, just as I was finding my footing, along came COVID. And theater shut down, Shakespeare shut down, everything shut down, the stage is shut down. Do you know the season's going to begin for anybody? Oh, I found ways to keep the skills somewhat honed. I took a monologue class, took a storytelling class. I did a musical number for a music video a friend of mine was casting. I did some radio and TV ads for political candidates in the election campaign. We even got together the original cast of the Threepenny Opera we did a year ago to do a Zoom room reading of an original draft play by a British playwright who was in London. I mean, it's all work, but it's not the same thing. I yearn for an audience. I yearn for a connection. I yearn for real theater, for high wire without a net, for taking risks, for failing greatly. I wish it would come back. And there's still roles that I want to play. I want to play Chekhov. I want to do Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. I want to do Long Day's Journey into Night, Death of a Salesman, Doll's House, Torvald, Willie, James. Where are you? Well, I can still play you. And I don't think I have a lot of time. I mean, 80% of the people who die from COVID are over 65. And that's way in my rear view mirror. I can see the dark at the end of the tunnel. And I don't know when I'm getting another chance. And then I think about my friend Nancy out in Seattle. She's 88 years old. And she edits Shakespeare down to 90 minutes or less. And she drops those scripts in the laps of actors who are in their 80s. And they roll around in their wheelchairs doing Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet. 80-year-olds playing Romeo and Ophelia. Maybe there's hope for me yet, even for some of those younger parts.